Usually when we talk about measuring something, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, totally. Like engineering or science.
Right. I mean, you want to know how much a bag of apples weighs, you put it on a digital scale, the numbers flash, and boom, there it is.
Yeah, it's binary. It's objective. Heavy or light.
It's clean. And, it's comforting. We really like things to be visible and perfectly categorized. We want things quantifiable.
You do. But then you step into the world of ancient texts, specifically texts dealing with, like, spiritual or internal realities.
Yeah.
And suddenly that digital scale is just completely broken. I mean, we're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters because, how do you measure a human soul?
Right.
What's the metric for the internal substance of a human being? How do you weigh a conscience?
Exactly. And that is the crux of what we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
We are on a mission to decode this fascinating collection of ancient literature that explores these, well, seemingly cryptic metaphors.
Very cryptic.
Specifically, we're looking at the imagery of scales, balances, and measuring rods. We're going to dive deep into the book of Revelation, the book of Proverbs, Daniel, and the Gospel of John.
Right, a whole sweep of ancient thought.
Yeah. And the goal here, whether you're a theology buff, a history nerd, or just someone listening who's trying to figure out what actually matters in your own life, the goal is to understand what these measuring tools really represent.
Because it's not about literal apples anymore.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
What exactly is being measured? And why do these ancient authors insist that understanding this divine standard is the ultimate key to spiritual survival? And strangely enough, true freedom.
It's an incredibly high-stakes premise, honestly. These ancient authors aren't just giving us nice poetry or, like, pleasant metaphors.
Right, they are dead serious.
They are. They're laying out what they view as the fundamental, inescapable mechanics of the universe. They are arguing that there is an objective law of gravity for the human soul. And, well, you can either understand how it works or you can be crushed by it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Because the imagery really hits the ground running, and it's pretty intense. If we look at the book of Revelation, chapter 6, it talks about this famous black horse, and the rider is holding a pair of scales.
Yes, very famous image.
And then later in Revelation chapters 11 and 21, the imagery shifts to this measuring reed or a measuring rod. Now, as a modern reader, I think my first instinct, and probably yours listening, is to picture a literal scale or a literal wooden stick.
Oh, absolutely. But what's fascinating is how quickly these texts actually warn us against that kind of literalism.
Right.
The internal logic of these narratives actually argues that reading these descriptions as physical, tangible objects leads to immediate, almost comical confusion.
Yeah, I mean, take Revelation 21. There's this part where an angel is measuring a spiritual city, the New Jerusalem.
Right, the dimensions are just astronomical.
Literally huge. It's essentially this massive cube stretching up into the atmosphere. If you try to picture someone trying to measure a divine, multidimensional kingdom with a literal piece of bamboo, it's absurd.
It really is. You aren't going to measure a celestial reality with a yardstick you picked up at the hardware store.
Exactly.
So this is the critical foundation we have to establish right off the bat. These tools, the scales, the balances, the rods, they are entirely metaphorical.
Okay, so no physical wood or metal.
Right. But they are very specific metaphors pointing toward two interconnected realities.
I'm tracking with you.
First, they represent the word or the law or the unyielding standard of a divine creator.
Okay.
And second, and this is where it gets really interesting, they represent the person who carries that word.
Wait, I need to pause here and challenge this a bit just to make sure the mechanics of this metaphor actually make sense.
Go for it.
So when ancient apocalyptic texts mention a divine figure or an angel holding a rod or a scale, we aren't supposed to picture a tool floating in the air. We aren't even supposed to picture a tool being used as a physical instrument.
Right.
We are supposed to understand that a person is acting as a standard. Like the human being is the scale.
Exactly that. It's a brilliant conceptual leap, honestly. If you look across the broader landscape of ancient Near Eastern texts, or even stepping outside into other global mythologies, think about the major historical or prophetic figures. Think about Moses standing before Pharaoh.
Right, holding the staff.
Yes. Think about Aaron. Think about ancient depictions of patriarchs like Abraham, or, even if you look east to representations of Taoist immortals, what do they almost always have in their hands?
A staff.
Yeah.
A rod. A shepherd's crook. Always some kind of walking stick.
Right. And it's not just because the desert terrain was rocky and they needed help hiking.
Though I'm sure it helped.
Sure. But in ancient iconography, a rod is a symbol of delegated authority. It represents the standard of the ruler they serve.
Oh, I see.
But the crucial philosophical point these texts are making is that the tool only matters if someone is wielding it. A beautiful bronze scale sitting on a table in an empty room does absolutely nothing.
It's just a paperweight.
It is an inert object. It requires a master to calibrate it and actually use it. Therefore, when a divine measuring tool appears in these prophetic texts, it signifies a person.
A messenger.
A messenger, a guide, a prophet, someone arriving on the scene to deliver and physically embody that absolute standard.
That completely shifts the perspective for me. It makes the text so much more dynamic. So when Revelation says an angel is holding a scale, it's actually describing an agent, someone who has completely internalized this divine standard stepping onto the stage of human history to take a measurement.
Yes, exactly. The person carrying the truth becomes the measuring rod for everyone around them.
Yeah.
The ancient mind understood that a disembodied truth is pretty useless. I mean, a law written on a stone tablet hidden away in a cave doesn't affect society.
Right, someone has to read it and live it out.
The standard has to be incarnated. It has to exist inside a person. So the tool and the person become one and the same in the metaphor. You are measured by how your life aligns with the messenger who embodies the standard.
Okay, but that raises a massive red flag for me.
Uh-oh. What is it?
Well, if a person is the scale, how do we know they are a true scale?
Yeah.
I mean, human history is littered with megalomaniacs and cult leaders who showed up holding a metaphorical stick, claiming to be the absolute standard of the universe.
Yes.
And it almost always led to tragedy.
That is the exact tension these texts are wrestling with, and it's why the standard can never originate from the messenger themselves.
Okay.
The messenger is just the scale. They are not the weights. The weights, the actual metrics of what is true, what is just, what is righteous, have to be immutable. They have to originate from outside the human system.
So the messenger doesn't get to make up the rules.
Exactly. If a leader says, I am the standard and I can change the rules whenever I want, that is a broken scale. A true messenger, according to this framework, is bound by a standard they did not create and they cannot alter.
Okay, that makes sense. The authority isn't in the wood of the staff. It's in the universal law the staff represents.
Exactly.
But this naturally leads to the next big question. If these messengers are walking around the earth acting as scales, what exactly are they trying to weigh? If I'm standing in front of this metaphorical scale, what part of me is being placed on the balance?
To answer that, we have to transition from the apocalyptic visions of Revelation into the wisdom literature.
The more, like, philosophical texts.
Right. Texts like Proverbs, Job, and the Psalms. Specifically, we're looking at passages like Proverbs 24.12, Job 31.6, and Psalm 62.9.
And what do they say?
Well, the answer they provide is incredibly confronting to modern sensibilities.
Because, again, we are obsessed with measurable physical weight. But that digital scale for your apples is useless here.
Completely useless. The metric isn't physical. And it's not even what we might consider success metrics.
Like what?
Well, the divine scale isn't measuring your bank account. It's not measuring your zip code, your social status, your academic titles, or even your outward visible philanthropy.
Which is pretty much everything society tells us is important.
Yeah, exactly. But these ancient authors argue that the divine scale measures the weight of the heart. Specifically, it measures the density of conscience, or you could say the amount of internalized word that actually resides inside a person's inner being.
You know, there is an analogy for this from the source material that is so vivid, I want to explore it fully.
The cup analogy.
Yes, the cup analogy. So I want you, listening to us right now, to picture a cup in your mind.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Imagine a heavy, incredibly ornate, jewel-encrusted goblet. It's forged from solid gold.
Sounds expensive.
Extremely. In our world, that cup represents someone's impressive outward identity. It's the CEO title, the massive social media following, the perfect family photos, the curated reputation. You look at it and think, wow, that is a heavy, substantial cup.
Right. It looks like it has a lot of value.
But if you take that beautiful cup and it is completely empty of liquid, if there is no water, no genuine conscience, no internal truth inside, to a person dying of thirst, that heavy gold cup is completely and utterly useless.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the philosophical argument of these texts. The divine standard does not care about the metallurgy of the cup.
It doesn't care about the gold.
It is entirely indifferent to the gold and the jewels. It cares exclusively about the volume and purity of the liquid inside. If we connect this to the overarching theme of human existence that these wisdom texts explore, the question is brutal. What good is an empty cup, no matter how much the world admires the craftsmanship?
You can spend 80 years polishing the gold, making sure everyone sees how shiny your cup is. But when you put it on the divine scale, the scale doesn't register the metal at all. It only registers the liquid.
And this is where Psalm 62.9 delivers a really devastating diagnostic result.
What happens in Psalm 62?
Well, the psalmist essentially conducts a thought experiment, placing the entirety of human society onto this divine balance.
Everyone.
Everyone. The text explicitly mentions both the lowborn and the highborn, meaning, the common laborer and the aristocratic elite. They are all put on the scale together.
And what's the result?
The text says they are lighter than a breath.
Lighter than a breath. Man, that is such a haunting, almost surreal image.
It really is.
Just imagine stepping onto a scale, fully expecting the heavy thud of metal hitting the floor because you've built this massive, important life. You have the title, you have the wealth, you think you are this incredibly weighty individual in society. Instead of dropping down, the scale goes up. Just float away.
You float upwards because, metaphysically speaking, you have zero internal substance. You are completely hollow.
That is terrifying.
And in this ancient metaphorical framework, if you float, you have catastrophically failed the test.
Because you have no liquid in the cup.
Exactly. The text suggests that this is actually the default state of humanity when devoid of an internalized divine truth. Without a genuine conscience rooted in something eternal, a person is just a vacuum surrounded by an ego. They are just air.
It really forces a hard stop. It makes you audit your own life, We live in a society that heavily incentivizes cup polishing. Entire industries exist just to make the outside of our cups look heavier to our neighbors.
Most of social media is just cup polishing.
Exactly. But if you strip all of that away right now, if you lost your job, your reputation, your wealth, your physical attractiveness, how much internal weight would you actually possess? Would you register on the scale at all, or would you drift away like a balloon?
It's an intense existential audit, but it also raises a practical, mechanical question about how this actually plays out in human experience. Like, how is this weight tested? Because it's not just a quiet, private moment.
Right. It's not like we all get a notification on our phones, line up in a neat row in a white room, and step on a physical scale while an angel with a clipboard nods and checks a box.
No, the testing process described in these texts is anything but passive. It is a violent, chaotic, and highly public sorting process.
Right.
And to explain the mechanism of this test, the ancient authors shift from the marketplace metaphor of the scale to an agricultural metaphor.
Okay, so we are moving to the threshing floor.
Yes. We see this vividly in passages like Matthew 3.1 and throughout the visions in Revelation 7. Now, to truly grasp the gravity of this, we need to understand the mechanics of ancient agriculture. A threshing floor wasn't just a random patch of dirt.
It was a very specific setup.
Very specific. It was a chosen, elevated, hard-packed surface where the harvested crop was brought to be processed.
And the goal there is separation.
Yep.
You have the wheat, which is the dense, nutritious kernel that actually sustains life.
Yeah.
And you have the chaff, which is that dry, scaly, protective casing that surrounds the grain while it grows. But it has absolutely zero nutritional value.
Right. But here is the terrifying genius of this metaphor. When the stalks are first cut and brought to the threshing floor, the wheat and the chaff are fundamentally intertwined. They grew up in the exact same field, experienced the same rain, the same sun.
So they look identical.
Yes. When they are lying in a massive pile on the floor, they look practically identical.
So externally, you can't tell the difference. If you just glance at the pile, it all looks like a successful harvest.
Exactly. And this maps perfectly onto human communities. The chaff represents those heavy, ornate, but totally empty cups we just discussed. In a societal or religious context, the chaff represents people who have the outward appearance of belonging.
The cup polishers.
Exactly. They might sit in the same queues, use the same moral vocabulary, attend the same charity galas, and perform all the correct external rituals. To the human eye, they look like part of the harvest.
Right, they look like wheat.
But internally, they lack the dense, life-giving kernel of truth. The wheat, conversely, might not look any different on the outside, but it holds a heavy, solid core of reality.
So if human eyes can't tell the difference, how does the separation happen? I mean, you can't sift through a massive harvest by hand, picking out individual kernels.
No, you can't. The mechanism of separation is the wind.
The wind.
In the ancient Levant, farmers would wait for the strong afternoon sea breezes. They would take a winnowing fork, essentially a large wooden pitchfork, and throw the entire mixed pile of wheat and chaff high up into the air.
And gravity and wind do the rest of the work.
Precisely. The heavy wheat, because it possesses internal substance and weight, defies the wind. It falls straight back down to the hard floor, safe, secure, and gathered together.
Because it's heavy.
Right. But the chaff, because it is essentially lighter than a breath, is immediately caught by the gale and blown violently away, scattered into the wilderness, or burned.
Okay, wait, this is brilliant. If we connect this back to the first metaphor, the scale, the wind IS, a kind of scale.
It absolutely is.
It's not a static balance beam sitting on a counter. It's a dynamic environmental measurement. The wind is the scale in action. If you are heavy with substance, if you are the wheat, you stay grounded, the wind hits you, and you drop right back to the floor.
Exactly.
But if you are light as air, the wind serves as the ultimate diagnostic tool. It reveals your emptiness by blowing you away.
That is exactly the synthesis these texts are driving at. The wind is an active, undeniable measurement of weight. And we have to recognize that the wind described in these texts, especially in an apocalyptic context like Revelation 7, is not a gentle, refreshing evening breeze.
Definitely not.
Revelation describes angels holding back the four winds of the earth until a specific group of people, the 144,000, who metaphorically represent the ultimate, fully matured wheat, are sealed and protected.
So what does this apocalyptic wind represent in the actual day-to-day reality of human existence? Because we aren't talking about meteorology here.
No, the wind represents tribulation. It represents severe hardships, economic collapse, societal chaos, disease, personal tragedy, betrayal.
The real heavy stuff.
The wind is the chaotic, destructive force of living in a broken world.
It's the crisis that hits you out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. And the text contains a profound warning about complacency here, because many people operate under a delusion of safety.
How do you mean?
Well, they look around and think, well, I'm sitting right here on the threshing floor. I'm part of this good community. I'm married to a good person. I go to the right institution. I look just like the wheat next to me. They rely on their physical proximity to truth rather than the internalization of it.
Ah, I see. Guilt by association, but for goodness. Goodness by association.
Right. But the fundamental premise of these texts is that the wind is inescapable. It will blow. Hardship will come to every single person.
And when the wind blows, the wind doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care who you are sitting next to. It only tests your internal density.
Exactly. Tribulation exposes the lack of internal substance. If a crisis hits, say, a massive financial loss or a severe health diagnosis, and your entire moral center collapses, if you immediately resort to bitterness, corruption, or despair,
The wind just blew you away.
the ancient texts would argue it's not because the wind was unfair, it's because you were chaff. You had no real weight to anchor you, your cup was empty all along, and the crisis merely revealed it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if the wind is testing our weight, and the goal is to be heavy enough to survive the winnowing process, it forces a massive philosophical question. Who decides what heavy enough actually is? If the wind is the scale, who calibrates the baseline?
And that question takes us directly to Proverbs 16.11, which really acts as the philosophical anchor for this entire system of thought.
Let's hear it.
The verse states, "Honest scales and balances are from the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of his making."
All the weights in the bag. Okay, we need to contextualize this for a modern audience because we definitely don't buy our groceries this way anymore.
No, we don't. If you walked into a bustling, ancient Near Eastern marketplace to buy grain or silver or spices, the merchant didn't have a digital readout. They used a balance scale.
Like the ones held by the blindfolded Lady of Justice.
Yes, exactly. They would put your purchase on one side of the scale. But to know the weight, they had to pull a physical stone out of a leather pouch tied to their belt and place it on the other side.
Okay, so the stone's in the bag.
Right. These stones were carved to specific, standardized weights, like a shekel or a mina.
You balance the scale using the standardized stones in the bag. But human nature being what it is and economics being what it is, this system was notoriously corrupt, wasn't it?
Incredibly corrupt. It was so common that the prophets of the Hebrew Bible are constantly screaming about it. A dishonest merchant would carry two sets of weights in their bag.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a slightly heavier set for when they were buying goods, and a slightly lighter set, maybe hollowed out on the bottom, for when they were selling. It was a way to silently, invisibly steal from the customer.
It's the ancient equivalent of putting your thumb on the scale.
Exactly. And while the wisdom literature certainly condemns literal economic fraud, the deeper argument is spiritual and psychological. The ancient authors argue that human beings do the exact same thing when it comes to morality and truth. We constantly manipulate the weights.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost our default setting as humans. If the wind of tribulation is blowing and we realize we might be a little too light to survive it, our first instinct isn't to do the hard work of gaining more internal substance.
No, that's too much work.
Our instinct is to lower the standard so we can pass the test without changing ourselves.
We complain to the universe. We say, the demand is too high. Total honesty in this business deal is impossible. Absolute fidelity in this relationship is unrealistic. This rule is too heavy.
We want to grade ourselves on a curve. I always think of it like secretly taping a magnet to the bottom of the scale. We want the indicator to read heavy. We want the prestige of being a moral, substantial person. But we want to cheat the system to get the result.
Exactly.
We constantly negotiate with reality. We say, well, I lied, but my intentions were good, so let's use the lighter stone for this measurement.
But Proverbs 16.11 is completely uncompromising. It shuts down that negotiation entirely. All the weights in the bag are of his making. The standard is not a communal consensus. It is not up for democratic vote.
It's absolute.
It is absolute. The criteria for what constitutes true, dense, eternal human substance belongs to the Creator alone.
You know, I want to push back on this because from a human perspective, this feels intensely rigid. Human nature is flawed, fragile, and deeply traumatized. We make mistakes.
We do.
Doesn't an absolute unyielding standard seem somewhat tyrannical? Like, why wouldn't a merciful system grade on a curve?
It's a very valid modern objection, for sure. But the ancient authors would argue that grading on a curve actually destroys the fabric of reality.
How so?
Think about structural engineering. If an engineer is building a skyscraper and the steel beams arrive slightly compromised, does it serve the residents of that building for the engineer to grade on a curve and just lower the safety standard to make the steel manufacturer feel better?
No, because the building will collapse and kill everyone when a storm hits.
Exactly. A compassionate engineer demands absolute adherence to the physical laws of tension and gravity because those laws govern survival. In the same way, these texts argue that the moral and spiritual laws of the universe are absolute. The weights cannot be altered because the nature of truth cannot be altered.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it like that.
If a messenger or a teacher comes along and lowers the standard to accommodate human ego, they aren't being compassionate, they are selling you a hollowed-out stone. And when the wind of tribulation hits, your compromised building will fall.
That is a harsh but profound reality check. You cannot argue with gravity, and you cannot negotiate with the weights in the divine bag.
And to prove that this standard cannot be negotiated with, regardless of who you are, the ancient texts provide two incredibly detailed, high-stakes historical case studies. We are going to look at two different individuals who were placed on the divine scale, and the outcomes are staggering.
Yes. The first one takes us to the book of Daniel, chapter 5. This is the origin of the phrase, the writing on the wall. It's one of the most cinematic, terrifying narratives in ancient literature. We have to set the geopolitical scene here because the context is everything.
It is entirely about context. We are in Babylon, the undisputed superpower of the ancient Near East. The year is around 539 BCE.
And the man on the throne is King Belshazzar. He is acting as co-regent. And Babylon at this point is considered utterly impregnable. The walls are notoriously massive, so wide that chariots could race along the top. The Euphrates River runs directly through the city, providing an endless water supply. From a human perspective, Belshazzar is the heaviest, most ornate gold cup on the planet.
He possesses ultimate human weight. He has the military, the wealth, the absolute political authority, and he decides to throw a massive, arrogant feast for 1,000 of his nobles.
Right in the middle of a war.
Right. Now, there is a deep psychological warfare aspect to this feast. Outside the walls, the Medo-Persian army is actually laying siege to the city. But Belshazzar is so confident in his impenetrable walls that he throws a party to essentially mock the enemy and mock the concept of vulnerability.
But he takes it a step further into deliberate sacrilege. He commands his servants to bring out the sacred gold and silver goblets that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had looted from the temple in Jerusalem decades earlier.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Belshazzar and his nobles drink wine from these sacred vessels while praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
This is a crucial detail. He is not just partying, he is making a theological statement of dominance. He is taking the vessels meant for the worship of the God of Israel, the God who claims to hold the absolute weights, and he is using them to toast his own invincibility. He is publicly declaring, "My scale is the only scale that matters."
And that is exactly when the universe intervenes. Right at the height of this arrogant revelry, a disembodied human hand appears out of thin air near the lampstand and begins writing on the plaster of the wall.
The psychological devastation of this moment is perfectly captured in the text. This king, who a moment ago believed he was a god, is suddenly paralyzed with terror. The text says his face grew pale, his knees knocked together, and his legs gave way. The veneer of his heavy cup shatters instantly.
Because deep down, he knows he's about to be measured by a standard he cannot control.
Right.
The hand writes 4 Aramaic words on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. The wisest men in Babylon are brought in, but none of them can read or interpret it. They are operating on human scales, so they are blind to the divine metric. Finally, they bring in Daniel, an exiled Judean prophet.
Daniel acts as the ultimate messenger here. He is the person carrying the divine rod, bringing the absolute scale into the throne room of the greatest empire on earth. Daniel doesn't flatter the king. He delivers the unvarnished reality.
And the specific word we need to focus on from that terrifying message is tekel. How does Daniel translate that for Belshazzar?
Daniel looks at the king and says, "Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting."
Weighed on the scales and found wanting. It is the ultimate catastrophic diagnostic failure.
The divine scale dropped into Babylon. God took King Belshazzar with his 1,000 nobles, his impenetrable walls, his looted gold, and his massive armies and placed him on the balance. And against the absolute weight of eternal truth and eternal conscience, Belshazzar was lighter than a breath. Despite all the external trappings of absolute power, internally, he was entirely hollow.
You floated right up.
He floated up, and the consequence of being found weightless was immediate and final. The text records that that very night the impregnable city was breached. Historical accounts suggest the Persians actually diverted the Euphrates River and marched right under the walls. Belshazzar was assassinated, and his entire mighty empire was given over to the Medes and Persians.
That's a staggering historical lesson. The universe does not care about your resume. It doesn't care about your military might or your bank account. The most powerful human being on the planet meant absolutely nothing when placed on the divine scale.
Nothing at all.
His external cup was shattered in a single evening because there was no truth inside it.
But the genius of the broader textual narrative we are examining is how it pairs this story of secular power with a very different story of religious power.
Yes, exactly.
If Daniel 5 is about a pagan king being judged, the Gospel of John, chapter 8, is about the judges themselves being judged.
Yes. The story of the woman caught in adultery. Let's really dig into the mechanics of this because it completely flips the script on how human beings weaponize the scale. So, let's set the scene here. The Pharisees and the scribes, the religious elite, the scholars who literally memorize, interpret, and enforce the law, bring a woman to Jesus. They claim she was caught in the very act of adultery.
Now, we have to understand their motivation. This is a trap. It is a jurisdictional and theological snare. They aren't seeking justice. They are using this woman as a pawn.
Right.
They bring her into the temple courts, place her in the center of the crowd, and they present Jesus with a dilemma. They say, "Moses, in the law, commanded us to stone such women." Now, what do you say?
They are holding up the literal textual law. They're essentially opening their leather pouch, pulling out a heavy stone, and saying, according to the weights in our bag, this woman must be executed. If you say, let her go, you are breaking the law of Moses. If you say, stone her, you run afoul of the Roman authorities who alone hold the right of capital punishment.
They are using what these texts would classify as a human-manipulated legal scale. They are looking purely at the external action, isolating it from any broader context of mercy or restoration, and demanding blood. They are entirely confident in their own weight. They believe that because they hold the law, they are the standard.
But Jesus does something incredibly disruptive. First, he ignores them. He bends down and starts writing in the dust of the ground with his finger, which, by the way, echoes the finger writing on the plaster wall in Babylon.
It's a fascinating parallel.
But then he stands up And he doesn't argue the legal precedent with them. He doesn't engage in a rabbinic debate about the nuances of the law.
No, he bypasses their manipulated scale entirely and introduces the absolute divine scale. He looks at them and says, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her."
It's a breathtaking intellectual judo move. He takes the scale they are using to measure the woman, and he violently swings it around and forces them to step onto it.
Exactly. And this is the profound twist. When Jesus, who in this narrative embodies the true divine standard, calibrates the scale to measure the internal heart rather than just the external infraction, the religious leaders realize they are utterly weightless.
They failed their own test.
The text says that beginning with the older ones, the ones who had lived longer and therefore accumulated a heavier internal burden of hidden guilt, they drop their stones and walk away one by one.
Because the divine scale measures conscience, and their consciences condemn them. But the conflict in John 8 doesn't end there, does it? The narrative pushes this dynamic even further in a later debate.
It does. Later in that exact same chapter, Jesus engages in a fierce debate with these same religious leaders about their origin and their ultimate allegiance.
Right.
The leaders claim ultimate spiritual pedigree. They say, "We are Abraham's descendants. The only father we have is God himself." They are claiming that their cup is filled with the purest, most ancient truth.
And Jesus, acting as the unyielding measuring rod, weighs their hearts and delivers a verdict just as devastating as the one Belshazzar received. What does he say?
He tells them, "If God were your father, you would love me. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires."
Wow. He tells the most devout religious scholars of the era that their spiritual DNA belongs to the adversary.
The irony is layered and profound. These men dragged a woman into the street ready to execute her for physical adultery. But when the divine scale was applied to them, it revealed that they were the ones guilty of massive spiritual adultery.
That's a huge shift.
They had abandoned the true compassionate standard of God to serve their own egos, their power structures, and their desire for control. They were using the law not to heal, but to murder.
That is an incredible synthesis of these two narratives.
Yeah.
Think about what we've just seen. In Babylon, the secular king with absolute political and military power is placed on the scale and found completely wanting. In Jerusalem, the religious elite with absolute moral and theological authority are placed on the scale and found completely wanting. It systematically dismantles human hierarchy.
It proves that human status, whether you wear the crown of Babylon or the robes of the High Council, offers zero protection when the absolute metric of truth is applied to the human heart. The divine scale cuts through all of our carefully constructed defenses. It only measures the reality of the internal life.
Okay, this brings us to a massive, overarching question, and I think anyone listening to this deep dive is probably feeling the immense weight of this right now. I know I am.
It's a lot to process.
Because if we follow the logic of these texts, the standard is absolute. We are constantly being weighed, our hearts are being tested. The winds of tribulation are inevitably coming to expose whether we are solid wheat or empty chaff. I have to be honest, doesn't that just make us slaves to a terrifying cosmic law? I mean, who wants to live under a microscope like that, constantly terrified of being found lighter than a breath?
It is the most natural human reaction to this paradigm. We inherently equate strict rules with oppression. We view absolute standards as a cage.
Right.
But the brilliant conclusion of this textual tradition found in passages like John 12.48 and the final chapters of Revelation 20 and 22 is that it reframes this entire dynamic.
How does it reframe it? Because right now, the threshing floor sounds like a pretty miserable place to exist.
Well, the texts don't back away from the reality of judgment. Revelation 20 vividly describes people standing before a great white throne, the books being opened, and the dead being judged according to what they had done. John 12.48 states explicitly that the word, the unyielding standard, is what will judge people on the last day.
So the judgment is real.
It is, but the ancient authors argue that adhering to this unchangeable law is not a form of slavery. In fact, they make the counterintuitive claim that radical submission to this absolute standard is the only mechanism that grants true human freedom.
I am going to push back hard on that. How does absolute obedience equal freedom? That sounds like Stockholm Syndrome. If I have to obey every single rule of this strict standard or risk being blown away like chaff, how is that functionally different from just being a well-treated slave?
That is the exact tension the texts anticipate. To explain the difference, the philosophical framework of these writings often relies on the analogy of a household.
Okay.
It asks us to compare the psychological experience of an employee or a hired servant living in a grand estate versus the experience of a son or a daughter living in that exact same estate.
Okay, walk me through the psychology of that.
Imagine a massive, wealthy estate. An employee, a servant, is there to do a job. They might obey the rules of the house perfectly. They show up on time, they clean what needs to be cleaned, they don't steal.
Sounds like a good employee.
But why do they obey? They obey out of a transactional fear of being fired. If they break the rules, their employment is terminated and they are cast out. Their relationship to the law of the house is entirely external and oppressive. They aren't free, they are just surviving within a system of constraints.
Right. They punch the clock, they keep their head down, and they hope the master of the house doesn't catch them making a mistake. It's an anxiety-driven existence.
Exactly. But now look at the child of the house, the son or the daughter. The child also has to obey the rules of the house. In fact, the expectations placed on the heir might be significantly higher because they carry the family name and are being trained to run the estate.
Okay, sure.
But the child's obedience does not stem from a terror of being fired.
Because you can't fire a son.
Precisely. Their obedience stems from their identity. The child internalizes the father's standard. The rules of the house aren't an oppressive force imposed from the outside. They are the family culture. And because the child aligns internally with the rules, they possess ultimate freedom within that space.
So they can walk into the kitchen at midnight and eat whatever is in the fridge without asking permission. They sleep securely, they have ownership of the space.
Yes. Because they have internalized the standard doesn't oppress them, it protects their inheritance. The text is asking a fundamental question of the reader. Are you relating to the universe as a slave or as an heir?
Wow.
A slave hates the rules and constantly tries to manipulate the weights in the bag to make the job easier, but an heir embodies the weights.
So what does this all mean for us practically?
I think it forces us to redefine our modern concept of freedom. We typically define freedom as autonomy anarchy, really. The ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with absolutely no consequences and no overarching standard. But the ancient texts argue that that kind of freedom is a delusion that ultimately turns you into chaff. If you reject the internal weight of truth and morality, you become light as air. You might feel free for a moment, floating on the breeze, but you have no substance. You are at the mercy of every chaotic wind that blows through history. Lawlessness isn't freedom, it's the precursor to destruction.
True freedom, then, is the internal alignment with absolute truth.
Yes. If you align your internal life with the unyielding standard of the Creator, you are no longer constrained by the law, you are protected by it. You don't live in terror of the divine scale because you know you have cultivated genuine substance inside your cup. You don't panic when the apocalyptic winds of tribulation start blowing because you know you are heavy enough, solid enough in your convictions and your truth to stay grounded on the threshing floor.
The narrative arc here is stunning. It moves us from a posture of fear, oh no, I'm going to be judged and destroyed, to a posture of active, joyful cultivation. The question shifts from, how can I avoid the scale, to, how can I aggressively fill my cup with more truth, more conscience, more integrity, so that I can experience the fearless freedom of a son or daughter?
Precisely. The coming measurement isn't a threat to hide from, it's a reality to prepare for by cultivating a genuine internal life that mirrors the standard of the one who holds the weights.
Okay, we have covered some incredibly profound ground today. Let me just briefly trace the through line of the journey we've taken through these ancient manuscripts. We started by decoding the metaphorical toolkit, the scales, the rods, realizing that in these texts, they don't represent literal objects, but rather people, messengers who embody a divine standard.
The incarnated word acting as the measure of humanity.
Right. And we learned that this divine scale does not care about the external shell. It is blind to the heavy gold cup of our social status, our wealth, or our religious titles. It exclusively measures the internal conscience, the actual liquid inside the cup.
And we explored the violent reality of the threshing floor, the realization that the winds of hardship and tribulation are not accidents. They are diagnostic tools designed to blow away the empty chaff who only look the part, while revealing the heavy, grounded wheat.
We saw that the weights in the divine bag are absolute and immutable. We cannot manipulate the standard to fit our modern comfort levels, as vividly demonstrated by the catastrophic fall of King Belshazzar in Babylon and the devastating exposure of the Pharisees' spiritual hypocrisy in Jerusalem.
And finally, we arrived at the profound paradox that radical alignment with this unchangeable standard is the only true path to human freedom. Not the anxious survival of an employee terrified of a boss, but the secure, boundless freedom of an heir resting in their own house.
If you step back and look at your own life, you have to realize that you are standing on that threshing floor right now. We all are. Life will inevitably provide the wind. The economy will shift. Sickness will come. Relationships will be tested. The question is not whether the wind will blow. The question is whether you have spent your time polishing the outside of your cup or whether you have cultivated enough internal substance to stand your ground when the gale hits.
The weights in the bag are set. The scale is waiting.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We talked about how the universe will not negotiate its standard, and yet human nature constantly tries to cheat the system. Take a hard, honest look at your own habits, your justifications, your private compromises. Where are you secretly trying to tape a magnet to the bottom of your own scale? In what specific areas of your life are you arrogantly demanding that the universe lower its standards for you, rather than doing the hard, quiet, unglamorous work of filling your own empty cup? Fill the cup. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.